Throughout my years of being in the fake community, I've seen a lot of people discuss whether or not this servant can take on that servant can take on this servant, and for the most part, these often turn into some real heated debates. I've seen it happen on the forums, I've seen it in the comment section of other videos, and a couple of mine as well. And while I do think that this is an interesting conversation, very rarely do I see people talk about this in an actual video. So today we're gonna do just that. We're gonna talk about EMIYA, who is an OG servant back from 2004, and we're gonna see how well he stacks up to all the new servants after all this time. One thing that you'll come to realize once you've seen a good amount of Fate is that somewhere down the line, traditional ranks become a bit of a side factor in the grand scheme of things. EMIYA is a servant who is credited for having just average speed, which is C rank. Yet, you take a look at the UB-Dub route and you see him hanging with Sasaki Kojiro at close range, despite Sasaki being described to be a master swordsman with A+ agility. There are several times that this happens to occur throughout the franchise. I wouldn't rack my brain over it. You come to realize what really matters is circumstance and the abilities. Say that you're a servant that has A rank strength. Sure, you may be defined to be the strongest, but if you don't have access to that power, then it becomes virtually useless. On a common note, you may be credited as someone who is a faster servant, but if you're placed in a situation like EMIYA where you're being petrified by Medusa and you don't have the parameters to cancel it out, then how much does that speed really matter? What separates EMIYA from the very beginning is that he is only a man, and he's being thrown into the belly of the beast. Look at the servants from Fate Stay Night. All of his contemporaries are pretty much gods. Ku's a god, Medusa's a god, Gil's a god, Hurt. And here you have little old EMIYA, who was somewhat of a normal man, turned counter guardian, holding his own against these deities, if not showing them up majority of the time. At the beginning of the novel, we were able to witness a hint of this in his first battle against Ku. Now, once we get further into the story, we find out that Ku's overall prowess was being restricted by a command seal during this fight. But despite that being said, Lancer was still faster than EMIYA the first time around. And regardless of this being the case, EMIYA was still able to respond to his attacks by projecting weapon upon weapon at a moment's notice after having them break several times in a row. It's almost as if the way that he fights in and of itself is a callback to his own training when he was Shiro, where he practiced magecraft on a day-to-day basis to the brink of death. This self-induced mental strife is the same sort of thing that would later prepare him for these gut-reacting situations. The novel tells us that Ku also threw over 100 blows and EMIYA lost a sword every single time. That's over 100 spawns in just a short period of time. Ku himself said, "Aight bruh, I know for a fact that I've disarmed you at least 27 times. And EMIYA mocks him for this as if to say that he spawned so many weapons that Ku can't even keep up with the actual count. By the time that the second fight rolls around, Lancer is no longer being held back by the command spell, which means that he can now go all out against EMIYA with his full power. This is when we discover one of EMIYA's true shortcomings: speed. Now, he's not necessarily slow by any means, but when it comes to speed, he's definitely not the fastest servant around. When Lancer was able to finally stop holding back, EMIYA himself admitted that he couldn't even recognize what was going on because the attacks were coming out that fast. At this point, he was forced to use his experience from the first fight combined with one of his skills, Eye of the Mind. When it comes to Sasaki, Hurt, and Ku, all of these servants are top tier in agility. Don't get it twisted. The only reason EMIYA is hanging with these servants in speed is because Eye of the Mind is telling him the best course of action. But that's the cool thing about it. He can use his mind's eye to make up the difference for not having their speed, thus being able to at least stand his ground against faster servants when another person couldn't, if nothing else. We then see him use Ro'ayas to block the Gabor, Ku's strongest attack. This is a nod to his durability. This is an attack that honestly shouldn't be blocked at all, being reduced to nothing in return of EMIYA spending majority of his energy. Then of course, he turned around, clashed with Saber, and casted his reality marble at a point where you would assume that he had nothing left. Now, moving along to his archery, although EMIYA says that he only has one trick up his sleeve, he in fact has access to both sword and bow skills at will, putting him ahead of a lot of servants right off the bat. One of his greatest feats, and one that I feel like needs to be reanimated, is him getting his shine on in the Fate route when he defeated Heracles 6 times in a row. Yes, Heracles, a top tier servant, one of the fastest servants in the franchise, and in that class specifically, he is adept at close range combat. Now, in the novel it tells us that this fight was undescribed. We don't really know how he pulled it off, all we know is that he did. The Dean adaptation, however, gives us an idea of how the fight may have went down. For starters, we see EMIYA using his bow. That's right, even in an enclosed area, this man was still giving Herc noble phantasms to the face with his bow. Granted, Herc was tanking those phantasms, but the idea is that he's an archer and he started at a disadvantage and he's still holding his own. Now, as you guys know, Herc has the noble phantasm God Hand, which means that this dude can't even be harmed unless it's coming from an A-rank phantasm. This makes his fight with Herc even more impressive because he's only able to do damage with A-rank phantasms, which means that he would be consuming the largest amount of energy possible through the entire fight, and he was still able to do his thing. Next, we see him trying to take some of Herc's lives with Khonsho and Byakuya. Going back to Herc's God Hand, EMIYA's Khonsho and Byakuya were only C rank, so by normal standards, they wouldn't even be effective. On the flip side, when they're wielded together, their parameters get an increase and they gain anti-physical powers. He can also reinforce them to further provide himself with his overedge counterpart. At that point, taking lives from Herc with these babies sounds a lot more believable. And lastly, of course, he goes out with a bang using his reality marble. EMIYA was so shocked by Archer's strength that she could only assume that Heracles had to be holding back. Heracles can't even talk, but the narration implied that he also was impressed by Archer's skills and really wished that he could have fought him under a different circumstance. Ku mentioned the same thing during their battle. Just like his sword skills, EMIYA's archery skills are nothing to just brush off. He's shown the ability to seamlessly switch from sword to bow during combat at the last minute. Shiro has described EMIYA's shots from his bow to look like they will be strong enough to mow down an entire house. Now, when you hear this, your first thought is that, oh, they're just trying to gas it up to make it sound cooler. But when you take a look at EMIYA's fight against Ku in Grand Order, and you see the actual dimensions of one of his shots from Ku's perspective, that kind of looks like it might take down a house or two. Might tear the whole block up on a good day. So we have to take this literal. Hollow Ataraxia also gives us a more detailed look at his skills. In his fight against Saber, it was stated that the distance between them was at least 4,000 meters. EMIYA's final shot was said to be delivered in an instant. Of course, the game had to slow it down to make it discernible to the reader, but by the way that it was laid out, the narration suggested that the shot was instantaneous. Mach speed on average comes in at about 343 meters per second. If we divide Mach speed into 4,000, this would mean that EMIYA's shot is hitting for at least Mach 11 in terms of speed. To further put this into perspective, the average bullet is only 1,800 miles per hour, which means that he's literally covering a range of 2.5 miles at 5 times the speed of a bullet in a second. And once he packs his shots with magical energy, these bullets practically become missiles. Insane. Another example of this is when Ren asked Archer for his help when they were fighting against Berserker. No different from Ataraxia, Archer let go of his shot at the duration of 6:18. We saw a flash in the sky to let us know that it was coming at 6:19, and it came into contact with Berserker at 6:20. This is how fast this man is actually shooting. Mind you that the distance here is longer than it was before. As we saw in the UB-Dub route when Shuro took Archer's skills, EMIYA can also hard counter projectiles with his reality marble as long as he has access to the resources, meaning that he's bound to give a lot of range-based characters that work. Not saying that he would be invincible or anything like that, but he's definitely not giving up any fights for free, as we saw with Heracles. Another cool thing about Kansho and Byakuya is that when they're brought out together, they also give the user anti-magic attributes on top of everything else. It's like having magic resistance and you don't even need to have the skill. Who needs skills when you got these on you? This allows him to break out of Medea's binding spell despite being on her turf with his back against the wall. He was able to dodge several of her energy beams on foot like it was nothing while carrying Shuro at the same exact time. He then throws his swords as a diversion that would give him enough time to prepare a shot with his bow. The ridiculous thing about this is that the novel tells us that he actually missed the shot. And this is just another testament to Archer's hypersonic speeds as a bowman. He didn't even hit her with his arrow, which means that the shockwave was so powerful that just being near it caused her great damage and knocked her out of the sky. This is on top of him breaking through her magical barrier when she tried to block it. He broke through the barrier of a magecraft specialist with ease. And then finally, another nod to his durability being that he survived several phantasms at point blank range from Gil after having his fight with Shuro, and then surviving this a day later, protecting Ren and Shuro with no mana supply to boot. So, for the conclusion, in reality, Archer honestly shouldn't even be this strong. I feel like he's a little too good to be average, but the limitations of his raw power threshold him when you put him next to the other servants. He does, however, have the versatility, the tact, and the unwillingness to yield that still makes him a formidable opponent. After all of this time and with 200 servants making their way into the franchise, I gotta say that EMIYA is a B-ranked servant. And that says a lot when you consider all the servants that he's up against. By the way, I decided to skip the scene where he survived the shadow, mostly because it was plot driven, so there wasn't really much to say there in terms of it being a feat. Also, I've heard that he has some feats in the extraverse in case you guys wanted to throw some of those in as well. Let me know what you guys think. Like this video so we can get it trending. Share this video so everybody will know about it. And follow me on Twitter for more updates on the Type Moon content. It is your boy Tsiah. I'm out.